Welcome to the VIFF Podcast, recorded on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. This podcast is a chance to hear more from the filmmakers presenting work at the annual Vancouver International Film Festival, as well as year-round at the VIFF Centre. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this podcast. My name is Ron Noor, and I'm the documentary programmer here at VIFF. This is the 44th year of the Vancouver International Film Festival, and I'm very pleased to have such an incredible array of documentarians all around the world, but specifically for today's event, we have an incredible British-based documentarian by the name of Elöise King, with her incredible debut feature, The Shadow Scholars. So Elöise, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's my first time in Vancouver, so it's a double sort of Canadian premiere and Vancouver trip.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making such a phenomenal film. I've been a fan of it since the beginning of the year, trying to get it at another festival that I programmed.
I'm so grateful for that, how much you've championed it. It's so heartwarming when people take to it and, want to bring it into their spaces. So
100%. I latch on. For certain filmmakers, I'm I want to take you everywhere I go. But I'm so happy for your success and everything that's been happening with the Shadow Scholars, more than deserved. So maybe the best way for us to start is for you to describe more about what the film is about.
So The Shadow Scholars tells the story of the sort of 40,000 young people in Kenya who write essays, doctorates and theses for students all over the world. And it's led in terms of our story by Professor Patricia Kingori, who's an Oxford professor, the youngest woman in 925 years, who also is a Black professor and of Kenyan heritage. And so it was a story that was both professionally really important to her and then increasingly personally very important to her to tell.
Yeah. I would love to know more about what first brought you into the project, right? You've been working in documentary for quite a while, successfully, I might add. You had a position at Vice, and then also you founded Women on Docs as well. But yeah, tell us more about why this film for your debut. What was your first entry? Was it a question? Was it inquiry? Did you read something? You're like, whoa, this is fascinating.
Oh, all the good questions. So the reason it was this doc, or where I was at, I guess, in my career is that I'd been making docs, as you'd said, pretty much for the entirety of my career, everything from helping to start the TV department at Pulse Films to then moving into sort of mainstream broadcast television. And then I'd had the opportunity to sort of launch ID Video and Vice Video, so overseeing North America, South America, Europe and Asia. So a dream opportunity just to tell stories over and over and over again. And I think one of the things is that we'd made 200 hours of content probably in the 2.5, 3 years that I was there. And I came out of that, or I came to the end of that, at least for me, feeling that I wanted to do fewer, bigger, and what I really missed was being totally hands-on and every aspect, just being able to research something to the point of, being an expert on it. That was something that I really missed. And also, as someone who'd been a vessel for shepherding other people's stories, whether or not it was Women on Docs or through Vice and ID, I really wanted to tell my own story and see what that felt like to go back into leading a vision for a project and, taking a group and a community with you to do that. And so Professor Patricia Kingori and I have actually known each other for a really long time. Yeah, so we had a pre-existing relationship and we just met up once. We were having a conversation really casually, as you do. You never really get into huge amounts of detail with old friends. I've known her since I was 15. Wow. But I said, what are you up to? What are you working on? And she said to me, I've just been to a talk at the Oxford Internet Institute and I saw a graphic on the screen and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. It said that 72% of people in Kenya working online are writing essays, fake essays for people in the global north. And immediately I was like, how do real people write fake essays? That was my opening question.
Yeah.
And then it became a situation where every day at 7 a.m. I was texting her, being do you know anything more? There wasn't much out there, particularly in terms of academia. And actually, one of the first articles that we were able to get our claws into came from Canada. And it was about a young man called Daniel, that was a pseudonym that he was using, who had authored 100 essays in a single university group. And that's how they'd gotten caught, because there'd been one author for all of these students. And so that really, for us, sort of set off this desire, not only to work out how it could be that there are 40,000, and that's just in Nairobi alone, and that is an estimate of young people who are doing this work for other people, but also, like, how does it work? Why are they doing this? And who are they? And I think the immediate feeling when coming across that, I knew it was this, like, this would be my first feature, was because I was obsessed. And she was obsessed. And so that energy together as a collaboration really allowed us to keep asking questions. And then for me personally, I was the first person in my immediate family to go to university. At like age 17, I had like taken a gap year, worked for a year, saved up £25,000 to go to university and pay for it myself. And so I really intimately understood this idea that education can really be the difference between finding yourself outside of systems and opportunities, and this desire to use it to mobilize my life in some way. And that also I intimately understood that sometimes it doesn't deliver in quite the way that you expect it to. And so all of those questions and I suppose personal feelings really were a part of what made it feel like it was a story that I was able to tell but really wanted to tell.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I think, yeah, you just touched on something that's very important, which is this obsession factor, because it takes so many years. I want to know, like, from the moment that Patricia asked you or mentioned this presentation, and now with the context, this is October 2025. How long has it been?
Okay, I do want to say we did release in October 2024.
Yes, that's right.
Just as a caveat,
Yeah.
but no, in total, it's taken, the best part of 4 years of our lives. And I think having been in a position before where I was overseeing so many projects and we were turning things around and out like daily, weekly, I think I thought it would take, 2 years. And then the pandemic happened, like pretty much straight away as we went into pre-production and development, the pandemic occurred. So that was like a really big partner to navigate, like, for the project.
Yeah, that little thing.
Yeah, exactly.
COVID. I'm like dying to know more about the film, but I actually want to pause here and sort of like reverse engineer and learn more about you, Elöise, because you're someone who I've looked up to for years. You're a young Black woman who has taken such a leadership role in creative nonfiction. And now, like, you're even describing more of how this passion and this drive, this tenacity, right, for education, for inquiry. And I want to know, yeah, just more about you. Where are you from? What brought you to filmmaking specifically as well?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's really generous. And I really appreciate it. It's like really like touching. What brought me to filmmaking? Well, first of all, like, background, I was born in London to Caribbean parents. So my mom's of Jamaican heritage, my dad's of Grenadian heritage, but born in the UK. And I think my grandmother was like such an important person, like, in all of our lives. She was a real matriarch. She ran like the Afro-Caribbean Centre. She would host and be part of operating along with my aunts, who were sort of like Black schools that you would have at the weekend. So essentially those were because in the UK there'd been a system of people who were coming over as migrants, particularly Caribbeans, were classed as educationally subnormal immediately. So they were put into lower streams. And so, like, now that you ask me, I really understand the ways in which these things have become baked into the DNA of, like, who you are. And another aunt, like, ran the Sickle Cell Society. So I've actually come from a family who are really used to advocacy, but also really passionate about how you see yourself in the world. So one of the things that my grandma had said is, you can be whoever you want to be, but know that you're always going to have to work twice as hard. And I think that's something that people who grew up in sort of Black or families of color or women or migrants or immigrants. Like, so many people are told this about, you know, being outside and what it means to get inside. At age like 14, I became sort of obsessed with the idea of becoming a producer. I barely knew what it was. But I had watched Kim Longjinoto's Shinjuku Boys, and just this idea of really intimately going into other worlds and using it as a means to like understand the world really appealed to me. Like, our family were like very working class. My mum was a single parent for like the majority of my childhood. And so like traveling and going to all of these places wasn't always a possibility. But through documentary specifically, I was obsessed with how extraordinary real lives could be and how much I could learn and how much they could teach you about the world and how much I could understand the world through the lived experiences of other people. And so really that's a sort of essential tenet that has like gone through all of my work. And so whether or not it's been, I did a stint in advertising, whether or not I was helping to like launch the TV department at like Pulse, or whether or not it was then going into mainstream broadcast, where I specifically worked a lot on access documentaries and institutions, prisons. I did a film about young people who were tried as adults in the American justice system in Indiana in about 2014. And that was a real turning point in my career, because I really then understood like what were the machinations that I was really interested in. And I think if I were to talk about my work or my body of work as a whole now, whether or not it's been artists, creatives, musicians at ID, or telling stories about hidden people in like Sweden who were sort of migrants that were coming, I'm really interested in this relationship that happens between institutions and cultural turning points, and this idea of like progress. And actually, like, you know, whether or not it's a piece of legislation changing or whether or not it's a subculture being brought out from the underground, who flourishes in that, and then who sometimes sort of falls beneath the surface. And so that tension for me is really interesting. And you can almost see how, for me, the shadow scholars, this idea that technology is available, there are these really incredible people, but somehow they find themselves in this twilight industry, for me, is sort of all of those things happening at once. And as a queer filmmaker, as a queer woman, I'm really particularly interested in how you position marginalized identities at the center of like their own stories. And so telling a story about like the global majority is often something that I'm really drawn to, because we see it we see it so little, or at least we see the same stories over and over again. And for me, this was a completely original piece of work, a new idea that I had never heard about, something that felt instinctively that we probably all have been in a room with someone, whether or not it's at work or whether or not it's when we're studying, you know, like, I know we're all here, but do you know what you say you know? Like, are you qualified to do the thing that we all understand? And so that connection between the shadow scholars and the fact that they are doing work for thousands, millions, in fact, I think it's estimated 37 million students have used this, really resonated, and feels like it was a natural progression in terms of the journey I'd already been in terms of storytelling. And it felt substantial and really ambitious, and it tested me. It tested me on every single level. And it was my film school, because I am like self-taught, so it was kind of brought to me everything I kind of hoped to get from film, like personally, in terms of like development as an artist as well.
For sure. It's so good to hear you hear more about what brought you to this point. And it makes sense. Like, when you contextualize who you are, it's all baked into the fabric of the film itself. And also, like, what draws us to documentary is like this intersection of power, permission, privilege. These are all things that you're trying to unravel in the shadow scholars. And there's no clear answer too, right? Because this is, again, reality. We're trying to figure this out ourselves. I want to talk more about, this was like a multinational production. You're shooting in the UK, you're shooting on the continent in Kenya as well. How did you navigate that, again, as this is your debut film? just talk more about like the machinations behind that.
Okay, so I think like all things, like you're best starting them naively, otherwise you wouldn't start at all. But the film is across 3 continents, so primarily when we began, one of the things that Professor Patricia and I did and talked about a lot was how we could create our own rubric for like making this work. And it was really important. She was never in the film at the beginning. So imagine we're just 2 people collaborating, and I said to her, your research is amazing, but not very many people read academic papers or published papers, or at least not as many as should. And so how could we maybe bring these ideas in from like the margins, or at least the lofty ideas of academia, and make them accessible to more people? So that's like why I would want to make a film. And then as we got into this process, it really was about like finding who our partners were and people who would resonate with that. And we were so lucky really early on that Oxford University, for example, were a supporter in terms of the research process, which allowed us to really embed in the UK and in the institutions here, and then the welcome. The other really important and first real like industry support for me was from Field of Vision, who are like amazing and have an amazing track record. But also it was really important for me, knowing that we wanted to film in North America, that we had like that sort of support. Similarly, Firelight were totally intrinsic. And when I talk about that kind of film school, having that incubator system so Firelight Media run kind of a filmmakers fellowship, and they take you and the project when you're partway through the life of the film, and that was really important. So for the first 2 years, to answer your question, I was producing the film alone with Patricia, and then building teams that we would work with in Nairobi to film and to meet with the writers. And so it was always a kind of a case of, you start at the centre, which we felt was like the writers in Kenya. We worked with really amazing teams like Sam Soko's LBX, also worked with Zippy Kamundo's team at one point, and we'd also worked with Emily Wanja, who now no longer produces, but was my first producer who came in. DocuBox were really supportive in terms of recommending people. Like April Wambui was like our early assistant and came onto the project back and forth over 3 years. And so it was almost like building these little units out. 2 years into doing that, there was a travel ban that came in the pandemic. I don't know if you remember. So it meant that you could not travel from Europe anymore to Kenya, or anywhere in Africa. And that made for a stark realization that the film could possibly be over. And it was at that point that I talked to Patricia really about how she could be more central to the film. It coincided perfectly with the fact that she had gotten her professorship at Oxford. So, she'd gotten this monumental sort of acknowledgement in terms of her professional career. So her public profile had gone up. Sons of people in Kenya were reaching out to her and just congratulating her, people who didn't know her, just really proud. And so I said, look, there's a kind of a space for you to take, not, to use your platform to allow for this story to be told. And she was super reluctant, didn't want to do it. And she was like, I'm an academic, this isn't what I am here for. But her mum, who you'll notice is also called Patricia in the film, who is amazing, she turned around to Patricia and said, look, you've been doing this work for, more than 15 years, and you're constantly happy to go and to ask these people to be vulnerable, to tell them, to tell you details about their lives. But for some reason, you're unwilling to do the same. And that really prompted her to think about this. And like you said, like really grapple in real world terms with our own positionality, and like what were we willing to be vulnerable in order to make this possible and to meet the writers. And it's really like a credit to her that she was willing to go that extra
shout out
step.
to mom. Shout out to OG Patricia.
Exactly. I honestly want her I want like podcast recordings of Patricia's mum's like worldly wisdoms.
Wow.
And like she's so like uplifting, but she's also like very sort of staunchly Caribbean
Yeah.
in her sort of realness with it. And I feel like she's, really important part of the film in terms of just at least encouraging Patricia to sort of consider herself in the dynamics of this filmmaking process as well.
Yeah. Let's keep talking about this, about like adaptability, because the film opens on a specific title card, and I can't remember it verbatim, but essentially you were concealing the identities of a lot of the scholars and their families, and that changes the image itself, right? Was this was this something that you planned for in the beginning? Was this something that you had to adapt to later on in the edit? Tell us more about that.
No, it wasn't something that we planned
Yeah.
from the beginning. Actually, it's like every filmmaker's absolute worst nightmare. So we'd been filming for 3.5 years at that point. I'd been started the edit like sort of in tandem, and we were due to finish probably in that December, and the last shoot was in October. And then what happened is we'd been in consultation with legal teams in the UK and Kenya throughout this process. And one of the things that we'd done is we'd also held regular town halls with the writers. So every time we'd go back, we had like a process of rolling consent, in which I said, if you trust me, which I believe that you should, I want to be able to hear what your concerns are as they come up. And I also want you to know that we'll always come back before anything goes out, before anything's completed. So you know, if we trust each other in this process, I can come back. You can tell me what the issues are that I need to solve. Please give me time to solve them if I can. And ultimately, what became an unsolvable problem was that in 2023, I believe, academic writing or the provision of essays to students for pay as a service became illegal in the UK. It was banned. So it's not illegal in Kenya to do this work, but it became banned. And then also in Australia, it became illegal. So thousands of these websites overnight disappeared and were closed down. So there was real panic, like in the writing community. But more than anything, there was a fear that they were going to be criminalised. And that's the thing that we had always wanted to protect against, because we knew that what they were doing wasn't illegal there, but ethically it's obviously incredibly grey. And I think when you have a story which is easily positioned as, you know, global north, you know, doing something that is surreptitious or in this kind of quite like murky space, it's really easily that the media positions them as the bad guys, you know, as the cancer, as you hear in the film, who is intruding on the integrity of academia. And not only that, there was a real chance that there could, by bringing shame, as it were, on Kenya, like may there be repercussions from the governments there, who were increasingly becoming sort of punitive in any case. And so our legal team essentially said, we believe that we have to non-identify all of these people. And we gave all of the writers individually consultations with legal team, a separate third party legal, so they could also make the decision and be like informed. And when we came back together, we agreed that we would non-identify them, which sounds incredible. And, no, it sounds like devastating, because we really had an agenda, which was to bring full recognition, faces, names, people to the forefront, and for them to have a platform. So, you know, as we're traveling the film now, my imagination and Patricia's was always that those people would be right here with us, in front of us, you know, being able to take due credit for like all of the work they have been doing for years and years. And knowing that that wasn't going to be possible was really heartbreaking, but also a real awakening, like the loss of a certain kind of naivety, which is that these structures have existed for years and years and years, and it's systemic that they are hidden. There is a reason that we haven't known about them before, and this is another way in which they were being invisibilized.
Yeah, 100%. And it, like, again, the title of Shadow Scholars is now baked into like the visual grammar of the film itself.
Yeah, exactly. And so what you talked about is at the beginning of the film, there is a card that talks about how we've used AI, digital disguises, to protect the identities of the writers. And what that means in real world terms is we worked with an incredible VFX technologist called Ryan Laney, who also worked on Welcome to Chechnya.
Oh, right.
Who pioneered the use of this technology for the project, which was that there would be completely AI generated faces that were built outside of the film, treated with lighting conditions much like you do in VFX, and then reapplied to the faces. The challenges were they were black. There are very few data sets of black faces. The computer finds it really difficult to recognize the angles of faces that are not necessarily always sharp, for example, and as pointed as faces from other cultures. We were working sometimes in conditions that were low lighting, that were dark. We had actuality, so they weren't sit down interviews. So really breaking every single rule that would have been put in place had we known at the beginning. Right. We would end up using this technology. And it was really, again, a credit to him that he said when we brought this to him, he was like, I don't know how to do this. And 3 months later he came back and he said, it bothers me so much that I can't do this. This feels like a failing on our part, on the part of technology. I want to work this out for you. If you can give me some time, we can do that. And I think the most important thing is that AI, and rightly so, I think Black and global majority communities are really suspicious of the way that our images are used and appropriated without our consent. And so there was a real big conversation around the ethics and how we were going to use this technology, but also the power of being able to use it subversively to protect them, to tell their testimonies with truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much of the film is about ethics itself, right? Like we see Patricia trying to unravel what is right, what is wrong in this very strange new landscape that we're in. And so it makes sense that you had to adapt to the ethics of what the needs and your politics of care as a filmmaker as well. I want to get into this question of research. Again, this is a film about scholarship. We're following Patricia as she's building this scholarship at these scholars in Kenya writing as well. But for you as a filmmaker, how were you gathering data and information?
Yeah, this was really a sort of given like the wish that I had to really embed in something deeply in that research ethic. It was like a dream project, and to do that alongside someone as skilled and acclaimed and as careful and as caring as Patricia was, you know, like a masterclass in mentorship that you couldn't hope for any better. But essentially what would happen is that Patricia and I first went on a research trip together in which we held like focus groups. And so we were able to really understand, and I was able to understand her note-taking process or her style of listening and question asking. And we really found like a really deep like alignment in terms of ethically and how we wanted to work, but also how we wanted to give space to what was being said and to learning as we were going through. And then what would happen is I would travel back alone often to film with the writers and with the teams there, and that would also be a process of like researching and data gathering. I would be in contact with them really regularly, like via, you know, WhatsApp and other means and phone calls. But also I had every single Google alert you can imagine activated so that I would see any new news pieces that were being produced. I was also doing other sort of like research through academic papers, recommendations that Patricia was giving, reading Nyambola Nyanjala's book on like sort of the digital democracy and the work that was happening in Kenya. So those authors were also forming a really important landscape for me in terms of understanding, just as much as when we ended up bringing in Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I admit that Ngugi, his work wasn't known to me prior to making the film, but it was actually in a conversation that I had with Steve McQueen. And so I should actually mention that Steve McQueen, 2 years into coming on, he and his production company, Lamas Park, along with producers Bono Arakwe and Anna Smith-Tenser, came on board to support us completing the project, and also formed a big part of like our infrastructure for making, you know, for filming over the course of like an additional year. So we were in our first meeting. I was in my first creative meeting with Steve, and I said, I really feel like there is something palpably missing like a voice or poetry, or there was just something that felt, I just really didn't want the film to feel just solely academic and dry. Like for me, it was constantly this philosophical problem that we were trying to resolve around worth and geopolitics and power and all of these questions of positionality. And then he literally took out of his pocket a piece of paper. It was an article about Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who, for anyone who doesn't know, is an incredibly acclaimed and sadly now passed author, writer, activist, lecturer, teacher, educator from Kenya, who had written absolutely mind-blowing works of literature, but also had really vocally opposed colonialism, works on, decolonizing our minds, intrinsic to many decolonizing programs that people will be learning. And so that he pulls out this piece of paper and he's like, what about him? And I start reading it, and it jogs my memory that like a year prior, Patricia had written this incredible essay about the playfulness of a story called Without a Shadow of a Doubt that Ngugi wrote about himself and his younger brother. And they're trying to find out the ontology of the shadow. And it's this really playful allegory about two boys trying to work out why shadows may be different in different colours, or what properties they have, and sort of as they chase them around the world as they chase these shadows, trying to find out trying to catch one first. And reading that really opened up another layer for the film for me, and that research almost into the cultural psyche of Kenya was really important. And when we filmed with him, the whole room fell silent. Like it was such a special moment, because the reverence that all of our Kenyan team had for Ngugi, including Patricia, who was literally couldn't believe she was born, was just so important. And the grace and the playfulness with which he's able to use his intelligence is such a legacy that will be missed, but we have retained really gratefully within the film, with his words, with his work.
100%. And that's what's so great about filmmaking is now he's in this time capsule of this film, and he did really help to break down the didactic scholarship of what you were building with the film, and add this more lyrical, poetic understanding of what colonialism is, and this new era of neocolonialism as well, with these Kenyan scholars now producing academic labor for these students in the global north. So it was impeccable addition to the film.
Yeah.
I want to talk more now. Like you said, it's been a year since the film was released. You're having the UK theatrical release as well, and more goals in terms of distribution. What exactly is the impact that you want to have for the film, or what are the goals? What's the dream?
The dream is we are still fundraising for our impact campaign, and that includes capacity building workshops in which actually how do the people at the heart of the story, so writers and academic writers in Kenya, how can they inform policy where jobs and pipelines are being provided? Because one of the real issues here isn't just that the demand is in the global north, but people are willing to hide the work of other people who are allowing them to progress, but that there are not enough opportunities. So, a million students are graduating each year and then finding they can't get jobs in Kenya. And I know that's the case for lots of students who are graduating around the world. For the first time in history, we have a surplus of educated people. But in terms of what we really, really want is first and foremost for people to be able to come to the film and for it to activate them. We're really interested in, like you said, we didn't provide all of the answers simply because we didn't have them. And part of, I think, the way I work is how do we create work that allows us to reimagine new possibilities together. And so we would love for people to see that the writers aren't just passive recipients of aid, that Africa isn't isn't just a space in which aid is necessary or help and missions need to be made in order to bring them up to par, but actually that here are incredibly talented, educated, intelligent people who have built a system themselves that is highly regulated and sophisticated in its own ways. And what does this mean about if legitimate opportunities were being presented there, research institutes where they could be doing work, towards, other, whether or not it be medical discoveries or engineering, anything were being provided there in that location, and not just drained and taken out and siphoned off for other people to benefit from in other countries. I would really love, I think, the impact to be that there is a real grappling with the ways in which this situation has been able to occur. And, like for 400 years, we have a system that has been built on a social injustice, one that denies the intellectual capabilities of Africans and their descendants. And that's been used to structure a really unequal society in which, you have those who can teach, those who can lead, and those who exist beneath. And I'm part of that system. And my mum and, educational subnormality is part of this injustice. So we have really big hopes, and lots of them are about how do we move towards greater recognition that is equality. So if people are interested in meritocracy, then we need to be seeing everyone who's participating and everyone who's contributing to shaping our educational spaces, our institutions, because these ideas aren't just written on pieces of paper. They're used to make jobs. Yeah. And those jobs should be for the benefit of the writers in Kenya.
Incredible. It's one of the reasons why I love documentaries, because the filmmakers are not only invested in this sense of like political urgency, but not just in the film, right? But also in these impact campaigns. You want the film to be activated in policy, in politics, in the labor force as well. So thank you so much. I mean, what a powerful idea for what the film can be. I want to transition us to talk more about you, but especially now that your film is playing in theaters, we're really curious to know more from Elöise what your favorite memory at the cinema was.
I think I'm going to stick to this film. And my favourite memory was when we premiered at London Film Festival. We weren't able to obviously have the writers there. But the emotion was so high after how much we'd all been through to get the project to the end. And we had one of the writers, Chege, call in and speak to the audience. And I asked the entire audience to kind of shout back at him so that, so he knew that they were there. And just the feeling of all of those voices, and for him to know that this was just like the first phase of this story being brought to the world, and actually that this collaboration that we'd entered into with all of them would hopefully bring all of them closer to having what they want, which is to be recognized, to be acknowledged, but also to having more opportunities. And I think, that's probably a moment I'll always remember, just like how grateful I felt for us all to be there together, like the building blocks that it takes to make work is so much greater than any one person. And I really feel like this film is also so much bigger than any of us who created it, because it really does help us re-see ourselves for generations, not as people who used to, we were once kings in Africa, but actually brilliant people are here now, and it's really important that we don't keep denying them their right for opportunities.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And it's great to, even despite these like political threats or about safety and security, to still have him in the room and like experience the atmosphere.
He was like laughing so much because when he heard back, just that
it's
sort
like
of
shocking.
giddiness.
Yeah.
And the room was absolutely, you could hear a pin drop when he spoke. And, unsurprisingly, just so erudite and so powerful. And what I really understood was that, these are people who are the architects of their own like ideological like emancipation, and economic, and that was something that we should take really seriously.
Yeah. For our last question, we know what the Shadow Scholars is about, but for you, Elöise, do you have a perfect double bill for the film?
Yeah, I absolutely adored Seek and Mavis Beacon. It's like riotous and chaotic in its like perfect understanding of the impact of a black woman, Mavis Beacon, in technology, and the way that her image, her voice, her capacity has been used time and time again and like not attributed. And so whilst I think it seems, at least in form, it's so much more radical than our film. I love it. It's such a beautiful piece of work. But I think thematically it really speaks to the same speed. It speaks to the same sort of desires, and that's for us to have ownership within the spaces that we're operating in, and not to be dislocated from like the fruits of our labor. And so for me, that is a film that I would love to see as a double bill.
That is literally such a perfect answer. As soon as you said it, I'm like, whoa, that makes sense. And for folks who are curious, Seeking Mavis Beacon is a feature documentary that came out last year. It had its distribution from Neon, so it's actually available for folks to watch as well. And then, inshallah, same with the Shadow Scholars. We'll be seeing it soon, I'm sure. Elöise, thank you so much for your time, for your scholarship, for your knowledge, and for your generosity in sharing this film with us here in Vancouver. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate it too.
Elöise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the VIFF Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review. Also, check out viff.org to learn more about what's happening at the VIFF Center year-round.